wanted to welcome Sarah Sundin to our book club chat. We are discussing When Twilight Breaks, which is a novel set here it is, in 1938 Munich. So it was a little different than a lot of the World War II books that I've read, in that it actually takes place in Germany. Most of the time we see, it taking place in other areas in Europe or in the United States. And I really like that this kind of took us behind the scenes and showed us what it was like in Germany at the time. So, okay, so we have somebody from Southwest Michigan. I'm trying to see who you guys are, because right now it's just Facebook user to me. So I'm trying to see who you guys are that are chiming in. And Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about why this story? When did this story first grab your attention?
Well, it's been interesting because this is my 13th World War II era novel. And actually, it's a little before World War II, so it's a different thing for me. Also, I've always had military themes and Americans involved in the war. So this is a little bit different for me, though I do still have American characters. But I was inspired by, we went to Ellis Island a few years ago and put my grandfather's name in the computer. I was trying to find out information about when they'd come to America in the 1880s. Well, it turned out they came before Island was open, but his name popped up, and it was his trip from Hamburg, Germany, back to New York after his junior year abroad. It was 1936. Now, I knew he'd studied German. He was a professor of German, but for the first time I realized, oh my goodness, he was there in Hitler's Germany. And that really struck me. And of course, as a World War II novelist, I'm like, ooh, that's an angle I haven't explored yet. And we don't think of Americans being in Nazi Germany, but there was a huge colony of them everywhere, from correspondents to students to tourists to businessmen and others. So there was this big group of Americans in Nazi Germany. Well, what were their experiences like? And there's actually quite a bit of information because so many of them were correspondents. So it was kind of fun to get in and see something a little different, see what the build up to World War II, see what was going on behind the scenes in Germany, but approach it from an American point of view, so I could, because that's who I am. So I could stay true to that culture, and also just kind of have the observation of what was it to be observing, to be a part of it, but not quite be a part of it.
Right. It was really fascinating. I remember it was probably 15 years ago. I was in an antique store and I found a set of encyclopedias. And they were from 1932, I believe. Maybe it was right around the mid 30s. And just to, for interest's sake, I opened it up to Adolf Hitler, and it had this little itty bitty section, and it said he is the democratic socialist leader of this movement in Germany, and that was it. That was all that it said, because really the world didn't know what was about to hit them. Yeah. So how was it going behind those, behind the lines in Germany? Have you visited Germany before? Was this an area that you've seen in person?
Yes, we actually spent the summer of 2007 in Germany. My husband was in medical research at the time, and he was doing work with the German Red Cross, and he was traveling so much. And our kids were still, the time they were 8 to 14. And he was gone so much. And finally he got fed up and went to his office and his boss and said, if you're going to send me over there so much, why don't you just send the whole family? And his boss said, okay. So we rented a house in Mannheim. We rented a house in Mannheim. And while he worked during the day, I refreshed my college German and took the kids outside sightseeing and doing fun stuff. And then we did the big stuff on the weekends when he was free. But anyway, we had a whole summer in Germany. It was amazing. And just fell in love with Germany and the German people. But I was nowhere near published at that point. That was 2007. My first book didn't come out until 2010. I was still getting rejection letter after rejection letter. but I was writing World War II. So having that in my head, and I was actually writing stories about bomber pilots who were bombing Germany at that point. And so for me to be on the ground in Germany and imagining what they were going through, and also, seeing family pictures in the home where we were staying and realizing, her father probably fought in World War II on the other side. How do you deal with that as a human being, knowing your father fought in the war for the wrong side? I don't know what her father did. There wasn't a picture of him in uniform, but the concept of this national guilt, this individual guilt, and how did this happen? How did these incredibly interesting, intelligent, cultured people end up going and doing one of the biggest crimes in human history? So it was very interesting to get behind the scenes, like, how did this happen? But it was also very, very dark and I found myself getting very depressed when I was doing the research for this book. I had to make sure I went outside and went for walks, and just kind of connecting with nature was really important for me. And obviously the Lord, and just because it was so dark, and realizing, I think what struck me the most was, we always think of Hitler's rise being associated with violent street thugs, and oh yeah, well that's how he came to power, is these street thugs. And actually he did have the street toughs, his brown shirts, but he came to power because of the communist threat, and the big force behind him was middle class Christian people, good people. And they were like, we don't want to be run over by the communist hordes. We don't like this Hitler guy. He's brutish and rude, but he can keep the communists at bay. And that was terrifying to me. It's like, these are people like me. I mean, good, solid, middle class, professional Christian people. And how they brought him to power and kept him in power. And it was stunning to me, and just, I think the other thing was the extremism, because it was so much like today, where it was basically be told, if you hate communism, you have to choose fascism. If you hate fascism, you better choose communism. And with people in the middle not getting a choice. And I feel like, isn't that like America today? We have to pick one polar extreme or the other. No, we do not. We have to pick what's good. And that's what Peter learns in the story. Is he doesn't have to choose one side or the other. He has to choose what's good. And that's kind of my mantra. I keep telling people, no, you don't have to do that. You have to do what's good. So.
Right. Well, and I thought that was fascinating, and you did a really great job of talking about political issues and ideologies without condemning. I mean, you condemn Nazis.
Yeah.
You did that. But you didn't condemn what people might believe nowadays. Yeah. And it's funny, I've, not to get too political, but I have heard both sides of the two-party system that we have in our country. I've heard both sides talk about, compare our country to pre-World War II Germany.
Yes. And they always.
And so I think both sides see how that could happen if we're not careful.
Yeah.
With who we follow and how strongly we follow them. And you had this metaphor that you talk about in the book about being a reed, which can flex in a storm, versus what did you call it, a rod
or a stick,
or a stick, which would break. And I think that it's hard to know when should you act like a reed and when should you hold your ground and act like the stick or the rod, even if you might break. Exactly. And I think it's hard, even especially for Christians. When do we stand up and speak? You had mentioned Peter's backstory, and I thought that was an excellent way of showing how someone could be led to think something is better. It's the whole idea of trust the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't.
Yes.
He had seen the negative side of the communist led, society.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, about where he was coming from at the beginning of the story?
And it was a real threat worldwide. I mean, this was at the height of, this is in Stalin's years, where he's murdering his own people. I mean, tens of millions of his own people he's murdering. There's civil war in Spain. There were riots in the US. The communists were really gaining ground. There were lots of strikes and violence associated with those strikes. And so communism was a real threat, a violent threat, especially to the middle class or to the upper class. And Peter is upper class. So for him, communism is a real and serious threat. And so his father is killed by communists. And that's in the first chapter. So your second chapter, I think. So it's not like a huge spoiler, but his father was killed by communists rioting in his own factory. And so for Peter, this is a defining moment of this is the real threat in the world, and he needs to do everything in his power to make sure that threat does not over America.
And we get to see his struggle as he starts to come to terms with being wrong about what he has believed and what he has kind of stood behind as his eyes are opened. And then on the other extreme, you have this amazing journalist who is the ultimate, like, I am woman, hear me roar, you will not stop me, I will get the story, which I love. I mean, I think anytime in history, even today, if you are a female journalist, you have to be tough.
Yeah.
And you did a great job of making her tough, but relatable still. I would not have had the guts that she had.
Me either. I'm a total like her friend Libby is like, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah. And she, Rachel McDaniel says, yay for journalist heroines. She has a deep respect for them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, she's written some good ones.
Yes. And so how were you able to kind of display this ultra strong female in probably one of the hardest times it would have been to be a strong female?
Yeah. And that was fun. I mean, because she is my polar opposite in so many ways. I'm like, don't rock the boat. I hate conflict. I want everybody to stay nice. So in so many ways, she's not like me. But I was also a woman in science. I was a chemistry major. And I dealt with, and this was in the 80s. So it wasn't like it was, the 30s, but it was the 80s. It was still before they were talking about sexual harassment. And I dealt with professors who would make sexist jokes in front of the entire class and then look at me pointedly and say, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, and TAs who come over, I'd be working on something in the lab and they're like, oh, let me do that for you, honey. Just so this condescending, oh, she could never make it. And she's a girl. Not only is she a girl, but she's a white girl. Asian girls could do it, but not a white girl. And so there was definite condescension and definite sense of, you're in the wrong place, honey. I think you meant the English department on the other side of campus. That's where that's where you really should be. So it was definite, that sense. So I had experienced that to a lesser extent, obviously. But like we say in writing, everything is research. So that sense of frustration I felt when the TA was taking over my experiment because I couldn't do it myself. That frustration I felt, I was able to take that and amplify it and put it on Evelyn. And so that was fun to do. She was a fun character to write, and she's just so quick with words, which I'm not. I'm fine on paper. But in person, I'll think of the perfect comeback, the next day in the shower. So it was fun to write somebody like that, who's just quick with words and quick with the comeback and clever. So she was a super fun character, right? And when I put her and Peter in the room together, it was fun. I just took transcription. That's all I was doing. They're talking, I'm writing down as fast as I could.
Yeah. Well, and I know not everyone has read the book yet, so we're trying to keep this spoiler free as much as we can while still having a good discussion. But Evelyn learns something about her own identity pretty close to the beginning of the book. And it goes back to her grandparents. And it's something that really not only changes who she sees herself to be, but also puts a mark on her. So I'm wondering for the people who are watching, have you ever been in a situation, and you don't have to answer this in the comments, where something has made you a target of, hate, of violence, and are you the type to shrink away from that, or will it make you even more fierce, which is what she did. I mean, she took this new knowledge that she had about her identity, and it made her fight all that much more for the people around who were in vulnerable situations. I know for me, like, I'd like to think I would fight, but I don't know if I would. I
Yeah.
probably would have taken the first ticket out.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the funny thing. As I said, I hate conflict. I'm like, but I was bullied as a child. I had buck teeth. I used big words in public. I had freckles. I cried.
Now you get paid for that.
Oh my gosh. And I cried in public, which, it's like, put a big sign over my head, bully me, please. Because I was such an easy target. Make fun of her teeth, she breaks down in tears. Yay, bully points. I mean, they're like, yeah, so easy. They can get their, whatever, that rush that a bully feels about making somebody cry, which I don't understand, but it is real and it is universal. They can feel a rush by making somebody else react, whether it's by getting angry or breaking down in tears. I gave them that rush over and over and over again. So I was just bully target from 3rd grade all the way through about 9th grade. And I kind of just learned to blend in a little bit more. And I got braces. That helped a little bit.
Braces do help. I
had bugs. I had bugs. They were way out. They were, my front teeth. I mean, they really stuck out. So my God. But anyway, but see, the funny thing is, so I reacted personally to being bullied by crying. And this was like, I saw myself in action several times doing this. When I'd see somebody else get bullied, I got angry and then I got fierce. And I remember this one boy, and he was a pill, and he picked on me all the time. And I was used to him picking on me. And one day he picked on the nicest girl in our class. And we were in Girl Scouts together. And those little green berets we had to wear at the time with the little thingy on top. Well, he grabbed a beret and he was keeping it away from her. And she was getting really angry. And she was getting ready to cry. And I had just had it. I was in 4th grade. I was at the height of being bullied. And I just marched up to him and grabbed her beret out of my hand and stop it. And ran and handed it to my friend Anne. And she was like one of the few girls in the class who was nice to me. It's like, don't you worry. And she was still nice. And I just like snatched it. Like, stop it. Why am I not like this when I'm being mom? I'm like, oh. So,
right.
Yeah. So I had these moments, and another moment that just isn't like me, but I was in 7th grade and I was terrified of getting in the shower for PE, where all the girls had to strip naked and get in this mass shower. It was like my huge fear starting 7th grade. And this was back, you had to shower. There was no, you can get out. No, everybody had a shower. And I had this huge fear. I nausea from the fear of it. And I was short for my age, and I was still built like a 4-year-old and all the other things, and I didn't have them. And so I definitely didn't want to prove that I was built like a 4-year-old child. And so, but I remember this moment very carefully getting undressed, keeping the towel around me as I'm getting undressed so nobody can see me. And we all march over there, and we're standing by the shower, and we're all standing there with the towels wrapped around ourselves, staring at each other. And I remember looking at all these girls who were pretty and had things that I didn't have. And we were all terrified. And it was just a moment of like, I'm not alone. I thought I was the only one. I thought it was because of who I was, that I was the only one that was afraid to show herself. And looking at these girls who are all terrified, and somebody had to go first. And we're all standing there. The PE teacher was yelling at us, just yelling, "Get in the shower, girls, get in." She's a horrible person. And
Yeah.
all staring at each other, terrified. And all of a sudden, I'm just like, the heck with it. I just ripped off my towel and and they were talking, I mean, people were talking about it for a week. Sarah Stewart was the first one. Can you believe it? Sarah Stewart was the first one in the shower? Not her. So.
Yeah. So there was a big theme that you talked about, and you actually quoted one of Roosevelt's fireside chats.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, they chose to sacrifice liberty, as meaning the German people. They chose to sacrifice liberty in the hope of getting something to eat. And it was this idea of you can only stand up, for your rights and for liberty so long. At some point, you might be tempted to give in so that you can survive.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot of the people in Germany, and we've seen this many times over throughout history. And for Evelyn, her biggest thing was not losing her freedom. And we saw it in her relationship with Peter and in her relationship with Nazi Germany as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you came up with that theme for this book?
And I think that's so, we always like to think that if we lived in Nazi Germany, we would be like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the White Rose Resistance. We'd be the ones standing up and telling people what was going on. They all died for that. They all died. Almost everybody who resisted in Germany during Hitler's years died. Would I risk not just myself, but my husband and my children? Now, it's one thing if you're 20-something, you're single, you can be all brave and you're not affecting anybody but your own life. But when you're married and have children, that's a different thing. You've built up your business. You've built up your ministry. You've built up your career. Do you risk that? Or do you say, I'm a teacher. To be a teacher, you had to be a member of the Nazi Party. You had to belong to the teacher's boot. There were things that you had to do. You built up your teaching career. You either lose your job or you join the Nazi Party. Which do you do? And the reality is, I don't know. I don't know where I would draw the line. Would I be willing? And then the teachers were told, you have to teach this, and you have to teach that. You have to teach Aryan math, and you can't teach anything about the Jews. You can't teach this, and you can't teach that. Where do you stop and say, no, I would rather starve, and I probably will starve rather than do this. Or I would rather be sent to a concentration camp than do that. The reality is a lot of people, most Germans quietly kept their beliefs to themselves and just made do, kept their head down, did what they were supposed to do just to survive, to keep their families intact, to keep food on their table. And I don't know if I can honestly fault them for that. Do you risk your children's lives? It's hard to say. So for me, explore those things. It was a way for me to think it out myself. Where would I draw the line? And I still to this day, I don't know where I would draw that line. It's easy. My kids are grown up and out of the house. I could be braver now because their lives aren't going to be threatened as directly. But when they're little, I don't know. And so for Evelyn, who values freedom over everything, is such a huge thing. And then for Peter, who values order overall, order, stability, security. And I'm a security lover. I like everything nice and stable and quiet. So I relate to Peter in that way. But there's that cry for freedom, speech, freedom, religion. Those are woven into our spirit as Americans, but I think into our soul by God. And so when those clash, which do you choose? And I tried not to give as many answers in the stories. I wanted to have them hash it out, and for the reader to hash it out in their own head. What is more important to me? The ability to speak my mind, or order in the streets? Think about what's more important to you, and where do we draw the line? So
yeah, it was great. And each country had to make that same decision. Do we stand up to Hitler and sacrifice our boys, who will then go to war?
Yes.
You have France, who sacrificed the Jews who lived in their country, because they honestly believed that if they did that, they could appease Hitler. And of course that didn't work, because then they got invaded as well, and it's it really was something. And in the United States, we were just recovering from the Great Depression. Like we weren't even recovering quite yet, but like, we can't focus on helping other people. And so then there's that, do I protect our own, or do we protect those, the other people? And half of the atrocities we didn't even know about.
So it hadn't started yet either. I mean, that's what's interesting about writing about this time period. At that point, concentration camps were for political prisoners, not for annihilation of the Jews. The policy in Germany was to expel the Jews, to get them out of the country, not to kill them. But they were the problem is that we always say, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they leave? Oh, they didn't. I mean, we say, oh, they didn't know. Well, actually, most of them were desperately trying to leave, but they couldn't, because no one else would take them. Italy required them to be baptized as Catholics before they could be admitted. Would you give up your religion to be admitted to Italy? Spain was in the middle of a civil war. You're not going to go there. France had quotas. Britain had quotas. America had quotas. Australia said no. I mean, there were almost every country in the world said, we can't take any more. We can't take any refugees because we are reeling from the Great Depression. We don't have enough jobs for our own people. We can't take more. You combine that with anti-immigrant sentiment and anti-Semitism, which are still prevalent today. You combine those with the sense of we need to protect our own, and every nation around the world said, we'll take this many, no more, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. So I mean, I think a couple 100,000 people, Jews, on the waiting list to get into America, and they couldn't get in.
Yeah,
it's tragic. It really is.
Yeah,
I
think that's why it's important that you are writing books like this, and other people are writing books like this. I'm a big fan of the whole, history repeats itself, and the best thing that we can do is educate ourselves, and because we have seen this over and over and over again. I mean, in the early 2000s, we saw it with the Sudanese, and now we're seeing it with other populations who are trying to get into a better situation. And it is so hard because there are so many different sides of it as well. And you did a great job of kind of towing that sensitive line. So you did great. Here's a question for those who are watching. And if you're watching this later, watching back, you can still have time to comment. This is going to be for a giveaway of the next book that we are doing in our book club. Okay, so there was a line that said, our chances of survival are better together than apart. And that was a line that I believe Peter might have said to Evelyn, or vice versa, but it was about the two of them. And so I have a fun question for those in the comments. If you were in a situation where survival was the most important thing that you had to deal with, who would you choose to pair up with? And Sarah, I'll start with you. Who would you choose to pair up with in a survival situation?
My husband, not just because I love him and he's amazing, but because I tend to get all flustered and he's like, calm down, everything's gonna be fine. He's very, he knows what to do and he knows when to do it. And he can also be, he can be very, he could fight his way out of things. And so he'd be a really good one to have. But mostly because he keeps me calm when I'm getting crazy. but he also says I'm his diplomatic side. So, he can be rather brusque, and I'm like, well, what he really means is, so I tone down what he says, like, because I know his heart. He talks brusque, but his heart is just, he's a teddy bear. So I'm like, well, what Dave really means is this.
Yeah. And Jean says she would choose her husband too. And Trisha also says she would choose her husband. I would choose my husband too. But like you said, it wouldn't necessarily be because I love him and I'd like to have him around. He's the most capable person I know at just figuring things out. I have zero common sense. Like, it took me 5 straight minutes to figure out that I could have just gone on my personal hotspot or whatever. I have no common sense. In fact, I have told my children, if there's ever a zombie apocalypse or any kind of thing, and you have to decide if you're going to stick with me or your father, go with him, because I'm going to be dead in 5 minutes. Like, it won't even have reached me, and I will do something dumb, and I won't make it. So
I hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so for those of you, keep answering so that I can enter you into the giveaway, and I'll share what book we're going to be reading next in just a couple minutes. There was one question that I was really fascinated by. There was a lot of talk about beauty in this book, and I noticed even the way that you described the characters, you went out of your way to say they weren't unattractive, but they weren't necessarily attractive. Yeah. But there was something about them that, of course, the person saw beyond that. And then at the same time, you talked about how lipstick was banned in Germany. Yeah. Is that true?
Yes, makeup.
Yeah. Was that correlated at all?
Well, it's because the Nazis had this ideal womanhood, that how women are supposed to be, very much hearth and home. They'd say, is it Kinderkirche, I might have but it was children, kitchen, and church. That was where women were supposed to be. That was their sphere of influence. They were supposed to go past that. So this heavily made up, because remember, lipstick was a fairly modern thing. It was like very 20s. Think the 20s flapper girl, that she wore a lipstick. The 30s, the girls in the cabarets, they wore a lipstick. So for the Nazis, it represented everything about modern woman, which was like, get the women out of the house, out in the world, doing immoral things. So lipstick to them was personified what was wrong with modern womanhood. So no makeup. It was very popular to have the long hair with the braids wrapped around the head. Let's go back to the tradition. While the rest of the world, all the women were wearing, short hair and lots of curls and stuff. The German women were encouraged to do the traditional braids. So it was more about going back to traditional roles for womanhood. Mm-hmm. So the beauty, I think that's partly because of my own background. Remember, I was the one with the freckles and the so I'm always, and reading every book I read when I was a little girl that was romantic, the woman was always breathtakingly gorgeous. And he always fell in love with her because she was breathtakingly gorgeous. Her character didn't really matter because she was so gorgeous. She could be a brat. It didn't matter. She was gorgeous. And that bothered me. I felt like, why do I have to be nice for people to like me? And she's pretty. She doesn't have to be nice and everybody likes her. I'm like, that's not fair. That's just not fair. And for a Christian, I felt like, because we always talk about how character is so much more important than beauty, but then we write about beautiful people. So, and yes, most of my books do have attractive people. And my publisher, at one point, the publisher said, she says, no ugly on the cover, no ugly on the cover. Oh, and the reality is, if you put a plain-looking heroine on the cover, the books don't sell. You have to have a pretty heroine. But anyway, that is the reality of the market. But whenever I like to write a character who's quite traditionally beautiful, and it was fun to do, especially I was able to really get away with that with Evelyn and Peter, and because she shows her back, so you can't see. That was nice. I love that. So, anyway, and I like to do that because I like to say, character is more important than looks. And it was also fun that as the story progresses, first I think Peter says she wasn't pretty, but she was arresting. And then, of course, as the story, oh, she's beautiful. Because in his eyes, she's beautiful. And same with him. At first she's, he's not unattractive. But by the end, he's so handsome. So, and that's how when we fall in love, at first you might say, yeah, his nose is too big, and we fall in love. Like, I love his nose. His nose is the cutest thing. So
yeah.
Love changes how we view people. And so anyway, that's me. I guess set a realistic expectation, especially for younger women, younger readers, that especially for girls, like, yes, you're worthy of love, even if you aren't a model. And the most important thing you should be looking for in a man is not the breadth of his shoulders, but the depth of his character.
Yes. Yeah. I was watching and reading Cyrano de Bergerac because I'm using that trope in a book. And in that, he can't get the girl because he has a, famously big nose.
Yeah.
But he's not, he recognizes that about himself, but he's not self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's rare to see in stories because oftentimes we have, females who maybe they're not deemed traditionally attractive and they feel that to their core, and it really is an insecurity of theirs. She just kind of accepted it and went on her way. And then there was this really funny part in the book where she talks about how her mother used to say that pretty much she could pass as a boy because of the way she clomps around like a boy. And he says, no, you sway. I was laughing because he was able to see she has a little sway in her hips that he obviously found attractive. Okay, so my final question for you is, what is next? We did get a little sneak peek of something at the end of the book, but can you talk about what we can look forward to from you next?
Yes. Next book is going to be early 2022. Still waiting on the title-only cover. I can't wait. It is set in Paris in 1941, and it follows two Americans. And what intrigued me then was that there were Americans in Paris all the way through to Pearl Harbor, because America was still neutral. So after the Nazis invaded, the U.S. was still neutral. So they were free to move around. And then after Pearl Harbor, most of them were interned. So it was like put in a camp, but it was a nice camp, not a concentration camp. But anyway, I was like, oh, I want to learn about these Americans. So I have a woman who runs a bookstore, an American woman who runs a bookstore in Nazi-occupied Paris. And it was inspired by the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, which is very famous. It was kind of the home of the lost generation in the 1920s, 1930s Paris. And it was run by a woman who stayed throughout the whole occupation. Wow, what would lead a woman to stay when she has a choice to go home? So I was able to explore that. And I have a man who is a businessman who chooses to stay. And they each have good reasons to stay. And but they think that the other one's staying for the wrong reasons. So
good, there'll be lots of conflict. So
oh yeah,
sounds like a great story. And I think we all love stories that are set in France, even in good times and bad times. So yeah, that'll be great. We'll be looking forward to that. And we'll be looking forward to a title reveal and a cover reveal. Where can people find you, to be able to see those big reveals?
Well, easiest way to make sure you don't miss them is subscribe to my email newsletter, which is, you can find that button on my website. My website is sarahsundin.com, spelled just like you see on the little screen in front of you. And I'm also on Facebook, same name, Twitter, Instagram. I'm really easy to find because there aren't that many Sarah Sundins in the world. And, but yeah, to make sure you don't miss anything, the email newsletter is the best way, because Facebook will sometimes show you things, sometimes not. Depends what I had for breakfast.
Yeah, Exactly. Okay, well, I'll make sure that we get those links up in the comments so that people can definitely find you. And I just want to thank you for two things. First, I want to thank you for writing a story about such a dark time in history. And like you were saying, I mean, there was an outrageous amount of evil in the world at that time. But you also showed the outrageous amount of good that you saw. That you might have someone who was hunting someone, and then on the next page, you show someone who's willing to risk their life to hide someone. And thank you for keeping that hope in your books, even when we see the evil that abounds, and also for just keeping the hope of God in there. I think faith is something that can really carry us through. And you were also very respectful of other faiths in this book, which we don't always see. So I thank you for that. And then I also want to thank you for just how encouraging you are. You helped me when I was writing a novella about World War II nurses. And you know who I was, but you were willing to help me out and give me some resources. I love that about you, that you are willing to encourage us. And I really appreciate you, and I know our readers do, and everybody was looking forward to this book, and they've all enjoyed it from what I've heard. So thank you all so much. The book we are going to be reading for the month of March in the Love Wander Read Book Club is Yours True, or Love You Truly by Susan L. Tuttle. And this is a fun modern book, and it follows a show like The Bachelor. And if you hate shows like The Bachelor, you'll love this book. And if you are like me and you love shows like The Bachelor, you'll love this book. It's a big inside joke about reality dating shows, and it helps us travel all across the world. So, and Susan is super sweet as well. So we will, if you have written a comment at all during this broadcast or as it's aired later, you will be entered to win a copy of that book. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today. We appreciate you, we love you, and we love this book. And if you have not read Sarah's other books, she has this amazingly helpful guide where you can go through, I can't do this because I'm upside down, where you can go through and see every one of her books that she has written. So you can always catch up on her backlist. So if you do read any of those books, make sure you check into the Love Wander Read Book Club on Facebook and let us know what you think about Sarah's other books. Thank you all for putting up with my technical issues. Thank you, Sarah. And we will see you guys next time.